Hello, I'm Zonofir and welcome to another video on the Tech Quest. The handheld PC market has seen quite an uptick since the launch of Valve's excellent Steam Deck a few years back. Its compact form factor and solid performance was very much a proof of concept for an entire segment of the industry, and its success has spawned an age of other handhelds wanting a piece of the action. I really like these PC handhelds. I personally own the Steam Deck, the ROG Ally and the Lenovo Legion Go. They've all had their quirks, sure, but generally I've enjoyed them all. They are usually powered by some kind of Ryzen APU with varying capabilities, something quite common in this market. But today I'm going to be having a look at a Windows-based handheld not powered by AMD. I am of course referring to the MSI Claw. Let's get started. The MSI Claw A1M was released in early 2024 and goes against the grain in the hardware that powers it. It's available in two models in this size, and today we're going to be looking at the more powerful model of the two, which features one of Intel's newer Core Ultra 7 processors. It's got a 7-inch Full HD 120Hz screen, 16 gigs of DDR5 memory clocked in at a decent 6400 MHz, and it's powered by an Intel ARC graphics processor featuring 8 Xe cores based on the slightly older Alchemist architecture, all run from a 53 watt-hour battery. The processor inside the MSI Claw is the Intel Core Ultra 7 155H, featuring a total of 16 cores and 22 threads. The 155H has 6 performance cores with hyperthreading, backed up by 8 efficient cores for less demanding tasks, and finally 2 additional low power efficiency cores. Creature comforts of the model include a 1TB NVMe drive, Hall effect controls, an SD card slot for easy expandability, and Windows 11. It can also be hooked up to a dock of any kind really, and used like a regular PC, I say as I use the Claw to write this up. On paper, it sounds pretty great, and it should be. Back on release, and to this day, the MSI Claw A1M will set you back up to an eye-watering £700, which is decent PC money, especially if you buy some parts second-hand. So I go into this with realistic but big expectations. I of course paid nowhere near this amount myself. I actually traded in a lot of unused tech stuff around my home, and picked this up for around £100 after I'd finished my clear out, and paid a total of £335 total from Computer Exchange, a second-hand UK retailer. Anyway, without further delay, let's get going. Today's footage has been captured externally using an Elgato Game Capture Neo, so what you see here is exactly what you will get. We start off, as always, with Fallout 4 at 1080p and using the launcher's medium preset. Fallout 4 was solid in my regular Sanctuary to Concord run. While it did spend its time more towards 60fps, it had plenty of moments where the frame rate started dropping towards the low 50s. It wasn't at all a deal breaker, but it was often enough that there's no way you can miss it. It was still more than playable, but it's not perfect. Average was 58.7 FPS, with 1% coming in at 29.9 and the 0.1 coming in at a rather poor 9.7 FPS. When it comes to gaming, those percentile figures matter, as they give you an idea of how consistent your overall experience will be, and the Claw does fall a little lower than I would like to see on these percentile figures here, so yeah, it's an interesting start. Dying Light fared better. At 1080p and using the medium preset again, the Claw managed a pretty good experience overall that shook off some of Fallout's percentile problems. It ran great and looked fantastic on that 1080p screen, with an average of 67.5 FPS, with the percentile lows also being decent at 48.1 and 26.7 FPS respectively for the 1 and 0.1% lows. Overall, it was actually pretty great. The enhanced version of GTA 5 is up next. At 1080p and using the default settings selected for me by the game, which was mostly a concoction of settings towards the lower end, GTA 5 ran well enough, but like Fallout, did have some frame rate issues, especially when you were flying around Los Santos, where the frame rate could drop into the mid-40s. On the ground, the frame rate improved. Again, it wasn't completely steady. Average was 61.1 FPS, with a 1% of 40 FPS square on, and the 0.1% being 28.6 FPS. Red Dead Redemption 1 is up now. It's an older game, so I thought I'd try my luck at 1080p high. It ran pretty well overall, but it was definitely short of the 60 FPS target I normally like to aim for, but not so far away that it still wasn't a smooth enough experience. Hovering around the 50 FPS mark, Red Dead was overall quite consistent in its delivery on the MSI Claw, and you'll have a plenty good time on it. Consider dropping the resolution a notch if that 60 FPS is really important to you. Average was 49.1, with 1% and 0.1% being 38.9 and 29.3 respectively. The Last of Us Part 1 now, a much meatier title. Displayed at 1080p but using AMD's FSR, which dropped the render resolution to 960 by 536, and using the lowest possible settings, the MSI Claw just about delivered 30 FPS, but the average was propped up by smaller areas performing much better than more wide open areas, which would hover in the mid-20s. It was playable, just about, but you'll certainly have to go into this one on the Claw with realistic expectations. It's a notoriously demanding PC game that performs accordingly on mobile hardware. Average was 33.3 FPS, with respectable percentile lows of 24 FPS and 21.7 FPS at 1% and 0.1% respectively. Red Dead Redemption 2 now. At 720p and going with a medium preset, Red Dead 2 managed to be plenty playable enough, although at these quality settings it doesn't look its best. When you're playing handheld though, that 7-inch screen does hide a lot of sins, so although you'll still notice the lower quality in the video here, it won't be as apparent as it is when it's hooked up to capture equipment like this, so you will likely get by fine using the handheld. It ran well enough, and I've probably played this the most recently on the MSI Claw at this point, and I honestly think it's good enough despite the low resolution. Average was 51.5, with 1% at 35.9 and 0.1% at 24.3 FPS. It's old but still very popular. Left 4 Dead 2 was absolutely no problem at all for the ARC graphics here, and it made very light work of Left 4 Dead. Maxed out at 1080p. It's an unsurprisingly great experience, with the average being 193.4 FPS, with 1% and 0.1% being 111 and 67.4 FPS respectively. Metro Last Light Redux was another solid performer at 1080p and using the high preset. Metro ran absolutely fine, and this was plenty playable overall. Outdoor areas would see an ever so slight drop, but it is a game about tunnels, and you're going to be spending most of your time in one, so overall it's mostly not an issue. I played Last Light for around half an hour, and had a solid time on this. Average was 79.6, with the 1% at 54.4, and the 0.1% at 32.6 FPS. Overall, it was a pretty great experience. One of my personal favourites, Frostpunk, is up now at 1080p and using the low preset, and on the Fall of Winterhome, which is definitely one of the game's busiest scenarios. The Claw managed to pull this one off respectably. It played great, even if it didn't reach that 60 FPS number. Frostpunk is one of those games where its slower pace doesn't actually mind slower and lower frame rates, but the Claw wasn't that slow here. Average was 50.8, with 1% at 29.9 and 0.1% at 23 FPS on the dot. Overall, it was very playable. The excellent Black Mesa is next. At 1080p and using the game's low preset, Black Mesa was a solid experience right the way through, with an average well into triple digits, and overall just a smooth experience. Unfortunately, Source Engine loading skewers the results on source titles, but the average here was an excellent 129.1 FPS in my 45-minute playtime with it. Turn up the settings a couple of notches, and you'll still see plenty above 60 FPS I reckon. Whatever you choose, the Claw's going to run it great. Saints Row the 3rd remastered now. At 720p. Using the game's medium preset, Saints Row 3 ran well enough overall, but there was some minor stuttering here and there, which did make the game feel not quite as smooth as it could be. It was more than playable, but I did notice when the frame rate dipped, and the 0.1% lows also reflect this slight stuttering. Average was a solid 75.5 FPS, with 1% coming in at a decent 41.4 FPS, but the 0.1% low was a problem here at just 2.2 FPS, and you will definitely notice it. PUBG is our penultimate game today. At 720p and using the medium preset, the Claw delivered a solid overall experience that you could easily enjoy. There are occasional dips here and there, but I actually think capping this game to 60 FPS would alleviate a lot of these minor issues. Average was a good 69.6 FPS, with a respectable 1% of 41.4 FPS. The 0.1% was 2.2 FPS, but overall this was a pretty great time. And finally, Dead Island Definitive Edition. At 1080p and using the game's medium preset, Dead Island Riptide was a decent experience overall, with a solid 55.6 FPS average that made the game feel quite good to play. It didn't quite manage 60 FPS, but we're so close here that you're still going to have a great time. Percentile figures were 40.9 FPS and 21.7 FPS for 1% and 0.1% respectively. And that's a wrap. So, the MSI Claw. I'm nearly a week into using this Intel-based handheld almost exclusively, and I have mixed opinions on it. On one hand, the performance is nowhere near what I've come to expect of other similar handhelds like the Lenovo Legion Go in comparison, yet this is a machine that costs just as much as the Legion handheld. The Claw comes with quirks and things that are frankly not ideal. The Ultra 7155H uses a hell of a lot of power, and even the Claw's super battery mode pulls the power down to a not insignificant 20 watts, and this is the lowest power state you can set for the processor. In layman's terms, despite a 53 watt-hour battery, you'll get, at best, little more than an hour or so on a full charge. To add to this, the integrated graphics also aren't quite where they need to be. I know this ARC is based on Alchemist, Intel's first go at the new ARC GPUs, but it falls short even in older titles. On the desktop side, Battle Mage has been a significant improvement, and it would be interesting to see how that would compare to Intel's first gen ARC here. Performance would most certainly have been better. Given the price points, I believe it is absolutely fair to compare this directly to the Legion Go, and on that basis, the MSI Claw falls so far short of the Legion Go in performance that, objectively speaking, if I was recommending one of the two to you today, I'd recommend the Legion Go all day over the MSI Claw. The hardware that powers a Legion is undoubtedly better value for your money. and that's absolutely the one you should go for. I do want to be clear about this though, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the Claw itself. The screen is good, the form factor is comfortable and extended plays when you plug the charger in, and as a machine, it's a well-made piece of kit that I have enjoyed playing my games on. The issue is the hardware that powers it, and this is outside of anything that MSI themselves really control, other than the decision to use it. The Core Ultra 7 is a solid processor, but it uses far too much power for this platform, and the ARC graphics aren't anywhere near the excellent Radeon 780M featured in the Legion. The Claw is a tough sell at £700 for this performance, especially when its competitor is certainly more capable at the same money. One of the other things I want to add is that turning the Legion's power mode to just 10 watts still keeps mostly low-end games playable, but turning on super battery on the Claw at double the power starts making games actually quite unplayable. It's just not good enough in this power envelope compared to anything else on the market right now. Objectively, I can't recommend the MSI Claw A1M because I know that there are better performing machines for your money, and you should absolutely buy a handheld with the Ryzen Z1 Extreme on board over the 155H based Claw. It will serve you better for longer, and I believe it represents better value for your money. But subjectively, I can't help but like the MSI Claw, despite its obvious shortcomings. It's comfortable to use, the screen is decent, and there's a lot to like about it, even if the performance isn't quite right. If the price was lower, I'd certainly start retipping those scales. I'm going to be keeping a hold of the Claw, and you will certainly be seeing more of it in the near future. Either way, I've actually enjoyed my first week with the MSI Claw, and I guess that ultimately that's the real test, because time spent having fun is never wasted time. I've been Zonalfear, and this has been the MSI Claw on the Tech Quest. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, bye bye.